Good afternoon to our panelists this afternoon. We're so glad to be joined by Sarah Benson, who is the CEO of Women's Aid, Caroline Munyi, who is the Migrant Women's Health Coordinator with AkiDwA, and Dr Clíona Saidléar, who is the CEO of the Rape Crisis Network Ireland. Thank you for your papers. The members have read them, and I'm just going to do some follow-up questions now, if I might. Sarah, coming to yourself, first of all, domestic violence affects disproportionately women and children's lives. Would you explain the significance of your number one recommendation? Others I know have made similar recommendations, in particular your recommendation, and how, I suppose, to explain the need to address prevention, protection and perpetrator accountability.
Thanks, Gráinne, and thanks to the Citizens' Assembly for the opportunity to present as part of this exploration of the issue of gender equality. And coming from our perspective, we recognise that there are many different forms of gender-based violence, one of which, and one of the most manifest, is domestic violence, which very disproportionately impacts women, although it impacts other cohorts as well. It occurs in the context of gender inequality. And so when we look at the issues of care, of leadership, of economic equality, what we see is that when 1 in 4 women in this country will suffer some form of abuse from a current or former partner in their lifetime, so 1/4 of the female population, that we cannot move forward to achieve a level playing field for equality in those areas if we don't address the way that gender-based violence and domestic violence, in the case of our submission, impacts on the ability for women to actually achieve that. So when we propose an integrated government strategy, we recognise that there are strategies and have been strategies there, but what we lack is something that gives absolute visibility to what we refer to as the three-legged stool. So, we don't want to be just looking at the criminal justice system and putting away perpetrators who, commit egregious crimes. Neither do we want to be having to provide supports and services to those who are in acute need at different stages of their experience of abuse. We want these forms of abuse to be eradicated. And so the third stool is, of course, prevention. And so there are certain sections of government, education being a good example, where we don't have a real clear line of sight as to how those education strategies, policies, curricula, for just to take that one example, are actively trying to overcome the issue of gender inequality around, respect, mutuality, around gender stereotypes, because all of those things then lead into how later on a certain proportion of men will act in an abusive way, in a power and a controlling way, which is what we see is not good for women. It's also not good for men either.
Could I move on to Caroline? Caroline, migrant women are, I think, disproportionately represented in figures of women presenting to frontline domestic and sexual violence services. What, in your view, should the Citizens' Assembly recommend to ensure the utmost supports for these women?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gráinne, and that's a very good question. What AkiDwA would recommend for the Citizens' Assembly to ensure that these women who present to the domestic violence services are well catered for from migrant backgrounds. One is representation, because when there's good representation, like of this on the part of the service providers, there'll be that what we like calling a cultural understanding of the major drivers of violence in migrant women's populations, and which are very, very varied. And so it will be easier to understand like what this woman is going through and what is driving that, because lack of that understanding, it will mean that a woman's needs might not be well attended to. And then the other thing, which is maybe closely linked to that, is also a person's migration status, and that will go now maybe to the various terms which some women hold here. And like, for example, some stamps will not allow a woman maybe to access work or to be independent, and so depending on a spouse, that's also like a major driver of violence among women, and maybe and then the spouse is not very supportive, because you'll also find that some of these women, they have education, they have qualifications, but for various reasons they cannot access paid employment because of that.
And of course, that holding stamps that are dependent on your husband, if he is an abuser, the idea of being able to act in a manner where you're independent, being able to access services, also having the money that you might need in order to move out, run away, in fact, runaway money is something that these women in particular, it makes them very vulnerable. Clíona, if I can come to you, if I might. Clíona, from the Rape Crisis Network, you highlight the prevalence and pervasiveness of sexual violence in your paper, and others in the other panels have suggested a national focal point or a national authority to deal with gender-based violence. You suggest, in addition, a victims commissioner. What added value would such a post give in addition to a national authority?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Gráinne. And I think when we came to our presentation, because I know that all of the other panelists agree, and I hope it's come across to you, that there is a gap. There's a gap in terms of our infrastructure nationally and in coordination and oversight and accountability. Now, the idea of a victims commissioner has been around for a while. It's been around in terms of general victims and not necessarily just domestic, sexual and gender-based violence victims. Again, that's something that can be debated further. But what the role of the commissioner and the victims commissioner, whatever we may call them, becomes is that when you are a victim, and nobody chooses to be a victim, we find ourselves victims through the choices other people make. It's almost always a surprise to us. And we find ourselves encountering a system and a set of systems that are deeply complex, that require a huge amount of different types of engagement across, from justice to supports to health to childcare to education to welfare. And we know that this is a very complex landscape, and in essence we ask survivors to become experts overnight in this very complex system. Now, we can put in place a lot of the supports around it to try to inform and to support people as they move through that system, but invariably there will be failures. There will be times when survivors are failed, when the system fails, when the transition from one system to another fails and something falls. And victims need a champion, essentially. So that is what a victims commissioner does. They are the champions, really picking up those pieces and making sure, and also really critically, we do a lot of that work in the NGO sector. There's people in the public sector who are charged with parts of that work also. But what a commissioner has is they're based in law. They have the authority to talk directly to government and directly to all of these different systems. So they have, if you like, the work that we can do working with existing systems, and in terms of persuasion, they would have authority, and that's really critical.
Sarah, back to you and your 3 Ps and the 3 stools, 3 legs of the stool that you were talking about. I know and I see that you're supportive of the 10 days paid statutory domestic leave, which has been in the media recently, and I think people would have been following it, and hopefully the government will push ahead with this proposal to support workers who experience domestic violence. You mentioned the need to review how family and criminal courts deal with domestic abuse cases as an immediate priority. Can you briefly just dig down a little into that and explain some of the problems here and why this review is so needed?
Yeah, so yes, in respect to the first proposition, we absolutely support the 10-day statutory leave, and we welcome the fact that the government appears to be moving ahead on that. We would add to that leave on its own will not be effective without a very clearly articulated approach, which could form a standard policy and procedures to encourage anyone in the workplace to know how they will be responded to, and what other issues such as safety planning, risk assessment can be actually quite easily provided by an employer. And we hope that the government will also take the lead in that with respect to its responsibility for the entire public service. So that's something we hope will be developed alongside that statutory provision. In terms of the criminal and family law courts, that is a very good example in microcosm of the urgent need to map the whole government and system response to victims of domestic violence. We conducted a study published in 2019, which showed the absolute gulf in terms of communication between the criminal and the civil system. When you have victims of domestic violence, that's absolutely crucial. They may be victims of offences which may be prosecuted through the criminal system. These could be sexual offences, assaults, breaches of orders, coercive control. However, at the same time, we recognise that unique almost among those who are victims of crime, you are more likely to have a family connection in that you may have shared property with this person, you may be married to this person, you may share children in common, and there are acute pinch points in the system where the issue, the experience of coercive controlling behaviour, the recognition that witnessing abuse of of a parent is in and of itself a form of child abuse, and those systems are failing both children and predominantly women, but victims of domestic abuse who are trying to navigate those systems. It is utterly exhausting. We'd like to be able to say, well, the government is doing this around prevention, it is doing this to ensure protection, and it is doing this in the criminal justice space, with recognition that for domestic violence particularly, there is commonly also civil legislative matters being attended to.
Very good. That's very clear. Thanks very much for that, Sarah. Caroline, coming back to you, as we know, Ireland has signed up to the Istanbul Convention to combat all forms of gender-based violence. How, in your view, could the approach to combating female genital mutilation be enhanced in Ireland?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gráinne. Yeah, how this can be enhanced in Ireland is by adopting what we call a national action plan, and which will be government-led. Like, that is what AkiDwA has been agitating for a national action plan, which is government-led. And this means that we will be able to create awareness to combat FGM among migrant communities, and then there will also be funding for organizations, because there will be other organizations which are in this area of work under that, and then the government with the national action plan there, and leading the way with specific goals and actions towards dealing with the issue of female genital mutilation, which I'm very grateful for the Istanbul Convention. Just that recognition that FGM is happening here, that's a step in the very right direction.
Clíona, coming back to you, explaining the importance of the oversight of a minister to that body that you were describing. In your experience, why is it important to have a minister?
So we have a whole of government response to this issue in a number of different locations across a range of departments and agencies. And we have a national strategy. We've had one for 10 years. We're on our third cycle of the national strategy, which basically looks to map that activity across government and the related agencies, including the NGOs, in terms of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. But what we haven't got is one minister responsible for all of that. One line up to cabinet around what's happening across the board on these issues. And what you have is one minister. Currently it sits in the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice only has some of those agencies within house. There's about another 15 outside that are across a range of other government departments. And no matter which minister you had, they would have a problem, because the bulk of the work is happening somewhere else that they're not directly accountable for and directly responsible for, and not responsible to them. And if I can give you an example, we had a government office, a national office within the Department of Justice overseeing the national strategy since 2007. And the first time that they were asked to bring a report to the Cabinet was in 2018. So there wasn't a direct line going up. There wasn't that attention at Cabinet level. So that's critically important, that the Cabinet is paying attention to it in a very coherent way. But the second aspect of this is that in terms of we, the public, having an interest in this subject and holding government to account around this, we need to be able to know who we're going to hold to account, whether it's in the Dáil or whether as a public, when we want to engage on this question, which minister do we talk to?
And finally, Caroline, I'll give the last word to you this afternoon. Many migrant women experience violence as they flee conflict or indeed are trafficked. How can the state properly support women and provide safety and sanctuary for these women?
Yeah, first and foremost is to recognize like some of the experiences, those tough experiences those women have gone. That would be very, very important, and to offer them the much needed psychological and emotional support through counseling, and to make sure like even the services which provide those supports are well funded. I know women's aids, they have that. AkiDwA, we try to do that, and others. And then to offer these women like opportunities for education, for work, and that will go a long way in ensuring that the women are supported, and then to keep on monitoring their situation constantly. And again, as I said when I was answering the first question, this again will tie in with ensuring that some of the services are culturally appropriate. There's that cultural understanding, and so this takes us again to representation. Who do the women see when they go to seek services? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you all very much for your papers and for your conversation this afternoon, and keep up all of the wonderful work that each of you are doing in your organizations. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.